how did you mean it's a happening, Elsie?
Well, it could be good or bad.
And it also has the quality. Stories are extraordinary. One of the attributes of the resurrected body is that we'll be able to bilocate. Certain saints are supposed to be able to do that before they die. You will be in two places at the same time. And it's one of the qualities that we will have after the resurrection. And the story allows us to bilocate. It has the same force, the same power that an experience that we have with another human being has. There are some people who identify with characters like Walter Mitty as deeply as they identify with their brother or their sister or their mother or their father. So it's a happening in the sense that when a happening occurs, we are fully involved as human beings. So a reunion of a mother and a son after a long time is a happening. Isn't there a wonderful movie with Robin Williams called The Happening? Or no? I'm not a movie person, so I don't know. So, wait.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in the but it doesn't make it. You're probably much more right than I know.
No, you probably got it. I'm not a movie person. But we can have the same kind of in literature or in stories, we can have the same kind of experience that we have in dramatic moments with others, and that's very powerful. That's a mystery. Why does that happen? It happens in the lives of the saints. They find something in the Gospels that say to them, here's who you should be. And their life is changed because of that. We know that the great moment in the life of St. Augustine, a little kid appears to him and says, Tole et lege, take this and read it. Take this. And so story is a substitute father, mother, sister, and brother for us. And remember that wonderful line in Hamlet, the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. That I'll watch as the king reacts to a story, and then I'll know who killed my father, and whether he's guilty or not. So that's one powerful thing about story. I'm going to tell you, well, first of all, look at Gymnopédie, but how I got on story. What is story is our first question. The second question is, why should we even bother to read the Iliad and the Odyssey? What is there about these two books that causes them to have endured longer than there has been a Christianity? They precede at least by 800 years the coming of Christianity, the coming of Christ. Why are they still around? Why did the Catholic Church, primarily Jesuits, insist that these books be a part of a curriculum in which they were training people to be responsible adults who came to love God? What is there about these books that causes that kind of transformation? Those are the two open questions we're going to be looking at today. One of the answers for that is this extraordinary little film clip on Gymnopédie. We have a composer by name Eric Satie, who was a little bit crazy, in the same way that Simone Weil was a little bit crazy. And he makes up this beautiful music, which has a tremendous influence on modern music. It's called minimalism. No dramatic results, just a simple melodic flow over and over again. And he seems to capture the spirit of an age, but a filmmaker listens to the music and says, my God, that's the sea. And of all of the places in literature where the sea is an actor, none is more powerful than the Iliad and the Odyssey. Unless it's the highlight of Greek literature, which I talked about yesterday, which are the plays of Sophocles. And I want to read you just a few lines. I won't go through the whole thing. From a great poem called Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold, which is a love poem. And it starts with the sea. The sea is calm tonight. The tide is full. The moon lies fair upon the straits. then he's with his beloved and he says to her, come to the window. It's a beautiful little love poem. He says, listen, you hear the grating roar of pebbles which the waves draw back and fling at their return up the high strand. Just listen to the sound that waves make on the beach. Now that might not seem to you the most romantic thing you've ever heard, but it's a very powerful thing, and that's why people go to Myrtle Beach and other things of that sort to be within earshot of the sea. They begin and cease, and then begin again with tremulous cadence, slow, and bring the eternal note of sadness in. But human beings are attracted to the sea because the pull of waves at the shore brings an eternal note of sadness into human life. But it's a sadness that can be controlled. It's at the edge of things. Anyway, a filmmaker hears Satie and says, I've got to put that into another medium. The medium he puts it into is music, and he does it by superimposing statues of Greek gods and Greek goddesses on the ebb and flow of the sea. And it becomes a major interpretation of the Iliad. I told you that Aaron Cross, by his very presence, was a major interpretation of the Iliad. There are critics who say nothing other than look at Aaron Cross, even though they've never met Aaron Cross. They say, look at the terrible things that can happen to a human being and how the spirit can endure that. Well, there's one reason why we read the Iliad, because we need all around us remembrances or hints that human beings can rise above any form of destruction. Human beings are animals who can transcend the circumstances in which they find themselves. And the whole of our life depends upon whether or not we ever learn that. That we can transcend the circumstances in which we discover that. Moses was here last when we were reading Huckleberry Finn, which might be the great American novel that takes place not on the sea but on a river. And in that, Huck Finn says, all the adults around me have told me that black people are not as good as white people. All of them have told me that if I become friends with a black person, I'll go to hell. He's a young kid. And he's in a beautiful friendship with a black man named Jim, who has no education and who has a superstitious view of things. But on a raft together, he comes to understand friendship in a way he never understood it before. Finn's an orphan. And he transcends his culture. He says, if God's going to punish me because I feel a strong bond of friendship with this black individual, he says in the novel, I'll go to hell. That's not a God I want to have anything to do with. And that same problem in American literature, which is faced in Huck Finn, Ernest Hemingway says Huck Finn is the great American novel, has as its message, a human being is an animal who lives in a culture, but every single human being has the ability to transcend that culture. You have it and I have it. What a wonderful thing. We have the power to go above everything that everybody else knows and to say, no, that's wrong. And I think that's part of what Homer did. He lived in a culture that believed in war. And there are instance after instance after instance in the Iliad and the Odyssey where he understands that's not the answer. There's something more than war that marks the human being. hate doesn't make us who we are. Anger is not the correct response to the gift of creation. So I think that's part of the answer. Well, anyway, here's another part of the answer. We'll just have fun and just watch it for 2 minutes. So it's a filmmaker who says almost, if you want to understand why you like this music, it's in Homer. Everything in Homer happens at the edge of the sea. Why? Because the sea, Matthew Arnold says, is one possible answer, brings a small note of sadness into every human relationship. I take joy in you, but there's a little sadness that we'll be leaving each other in a couple of days. And anyone who has had children knows that that little edge of sadness is always there. I remember in my own youth, the most remarkable moments were leaving my grandmother's house. She always cried. And yet we loved to be there, but there was this little note of sadness, kind of a grace note on the edge of things. You see that when students are leaving here and they're happy and graduating, going on their own, and you've given them everything you can. You say, well, I tried to do a good job. But then there's that little note of sadness. They're not going to be young forever. I think that's part of what this is all about. So just turn that the light on. This is
Remember in the realm of the diabolic here, but it doesn't.
film clips for that are available at least 100 spots on the internet. S-A-T-I-E, the last name, and Eric is the first name. And it's a very famous piece of music. You can just download the entire sound and play it all day on your computer.
What's the name of the piece?
Gymnopedie. Gymnopedie. And it's available on the internet for guitar, piano, everything. We're going to get Betty to play it tomorrow night, aren't we, Betty? No? Or tonight, isn't it? Or
James Galway and Neil Magnificat.
wow. Thank you very much. Okay, sister, thank you. Then I'll get this blue light out, right, sister? I'm going to tell you two very, very brief stories, and then we'll go right into book 19 of the Odyssey, and book 24 of the Iliad, and I might even explain the cover of the Odyssey. The stories are very brief. 28 years ago, I was, at this time of year, I was in a final review for an art student. I taught in an art college for 3 years. I can't even draw a stick figure. But there were 3 of us. The state of Massachusetts gave a BFA degree to this school, which favored artists, visual artists and sculptors. And the 3 of us had to make them literate. And people with a visual intelligence don't like to be literate. I had a wonderful 3 or 4 years at this school, and it was about this time of year. We went a little bit later in Massachusetts than we do in Minnesota. And I was sitting in a collapsible chair with a group of 10 other faculty, and a kid came in to give his, before they graduated, they had to give an estimation of all of their work and what it said about the human condition. So they'd bring in paintings or sculptures and that sort of thing, and it was a wonderful thing. The kid came in and it was a disaster, an absolute disaster. And he said, when questioned by the faculty, I'm really struggling in the depths of my soul to understand what it is to be human. He went on in that way. It was a beautiful speech. And without any warning, here's what came out of my mouth. And it is not who I am. I said, Michael, cut the crap. You've probably been in a bar every evening for the last 4 or 5 months. And that's why you don't have your show ready to go. I never talk like that to kids. I came home, I said to my wife, I don't know what got into me today. I said, if the voice was not my voice. The kid looked at me, daggers, got up and walked out of the room and disappeared. Because it was the last event of the year, I never saw the kid again, and I meant to write a little note to him and say, Michael, I don't know why I did that. And it still bothers me to this day that I did it. 6 years ago, I got an email on the internet. It said, I've been looking for you for 20 years. This is my 20th year of sobriety. I owe it all to you. I have a wife. I have 3 children. I have a design business. I'm a successful businessman. And I know with every fiber of my being that I would not be if you had not confronted me in that way. I did not confront him. I still don't know where that voice came from. I still don't know where that voice came from. I had the young man in class, and I did notice from time to time he would come disheveled and late and looking as though death had met him in the alley the night before. But I had never said anything to him about it. I'd never talked with him about it. I never even guessed at that. That's a very important insight into the Iliad. When Homer says a god or a goddess of appears to a hero. We're going to see Hermes appearing to Priam and Thetis appearing to Achilles in the story we're about to look at. That's an experience we've all had. Don't say you haven't. I know you had. There are 1,000 moments in your life where you don't know why you do a certain thing, or why you are at a certain place, or why a certain thing occurs to you. And the only way of explaining it is that either that Sister Michael had a hand in it, or in some way something larger than yourself is acting in your life. And over and over and over again. And the more you're conscious of that, the more clearly you see that there's some force which we choose to call the sacred or the divine or God that's at work on us all the time. Second story is about my mother-in-law, my wife's mother. My wife's mother had 10 children. They had no money. She decided the children were not getting a good enough education in the local schools. So she said, I'm going to teach you at home in the living room. And within a couple of months, she had 85 other youngsters in the living room with her own children. It went up to 120. It was a big living room. They spilled over into the dining room and every place else. The school is still in existence. It's one of the favorite schools in Washington, D.C. now for children of diplomats. It wasn't when she ran. She was an incredible teacher. She thought that notebooks were more important than textbooks. So the books the kids treasured were books in which they recorded their reactions to things that occurred during the day, rather than to see what people paid by a publisher had recorded as important. And my wife still has some of these beautiful notebooks that became a part of their everyday life, where they drew a picture of Achilles, or they studied French and Latin and music from kindergarten on in the school. She had a wonderful way of disciplining children. I remember sitting in the back of the room once when some clowns in the back were going at each other with pencils. And she said something that was very just off the cuff. Could we put the pencils down for a moment? We have to pick up our notebooks or something. And then you could count to 40. And this is what would happen after you just go 1, 2. So you go on with the rest of the class. And I don't know why it was 40, but there was just this space. When I think of how Hercule died of gangrene, it makes me sad even to this day. But we keep the class. You go this long, long story about her youth. When this terrible condition took over this child, and of course it would end up that he used to go around stabbing people with pencils. But it was a substitute for anger. There was no, you get that pencil out of your hand or I'm going to call your mother and get her up to the store. And it was the most, whenever anything went wrong, it was ignored for a count of 40. And then a story came out of God knows where that solved the problem. And one of the things that story does, we say that a story is corrective. A story is corrective. That Christ told that story, the story of the prodigal son. Don't get angry at your kids when they do something wrong. Welcome them back. Don't say, well, that person is an Iraqi, or that person is an Iranian, or that person is from a different social class than I am, or a different race. Say, a man was on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, and only one person came by to pick him up. Be that person. So story is a corrective. A lot of critics think that the Iliad and the Odyssey were meant to be corrective. But Homer had seen, I think perhaps with more genius than we realize, that the people of the lower Mediterranean have a tendency to be a little bit hot-headed. So he said, I'm going to write you a story about a hot-headed guy. You hear Homer counting to 40 after an argument. So with those two senses, those are two possible remedies for, or answers to the question, what is a story? A story is an alternative to anger. I do that with my own children all the time when they, someone will say, Thomas was out without his helmet on his bike today. I remember to count to 40. They say, you know, when I was a boy, there was a kid that lived next door to me, and they'll say, what was his name, Dad? I say, Johnny No-Head. And so I add another ingredient in there. I figure if I can get them to laugh, I can change them. And humor does have that corrective also. That occurs. So let's look at chapter 19 of Bailey with those two senses of story. And well, as a way of getting there, the other day I had a couple of minutes to go on the internet and I typed in the words peace and anger together. After something happened in here, I just went and walked by a machine and I said, well, let's just try on Google peace and anger. And I came up with this. A century ago, the great American psychologist William James argued that war could not be abolished until a substitute could be found for the psychological needs it fulfills. War is so much a part of who we are as human beings because whether we like it or not, it serves psychologically our nature. It's kind of scary. This is a famous essay James wrote called The Moral Equivalent of War, in which he argued for the Olympics as a possible substitute for